So yeah, I'm Emma, and I'm going to be going through a Zoopla case study. It's basically an investigation into a suitable framework for micro front ends, and this will address what our challenge is, why we're doing it, who we are, what we did, and our conclusion. So just an intro about me. My background is actually in Roman archaeology because once upon a time I wanted to be Indiana Jones. The dream died, there'll never be another Indiana Jones. And so instead of focusing on learning really, really old stuff, I started focusing on learning really, really new stuff. I have about 5+ years web development experience. Predominantly I've been using modern frameworks like Vue and Preact. Previously I was at UKTV, where I was responsible for TV and multi-device streaming apps, and now obviously I'm at Zoopla. I've been there for the grand total of 2 months next week. Cool. So this is our challenge. Apologies, this isn't a very, very lackluster diagram, but all you need to know is that over time, Zoopla has acquired 5 different estate agent CRM systems that basically do the same function. So like managing the residential sales, letting process, and the estate agent's office. So the challenge is to consolidate these systems into one modern cloud-based SaaS platform. The aim being to enable agents to perform these functions in a clear and simple system that is as easy to use as modern consumer products like Spotify and Facebook. And that's where we come in. So the software and productivity team, aka interactions and experience team, aka unofficially Space Sandwich. I don't think naming conventions is our strong point, so answers on a postcard if you have a better suggestion for us. But we are a very new dedicated team with the sole purpose of taking on this challenge. We will be the ones building the software that estate agents use to list and manage properties and tenants. So essentially what we have is a greenfield project. Therefore, finding the right framework or compiler will ensure that we get off to a really good, strong start. And these are the main requirements we considered when making our choice. So it must be able to scale quickly. When I say scale quickly, I mean in terms of size and scope. It must be maintained easily. So we want to be able to find, read, edit, modify, add, remove code with ease. And it must be able to onboard. So as the team grows, we want to make sure that all developers from any background can learn the frameworks that we choose, even with no direct prior experience. Ideally, we want a language that is cognitively intuitive. And it should be small and efficient, because we believe that performance should be at the heart of our product. So these are the 3 candidates, Preact, Vue, and Svelte. So we felt in terms of those considerations that I've just mentioned, these were really well suited. So over the last few weeks, I created the same app 3 times using these candidates so that we could gather metrics, make decent comparisons, what we did like, what we didn't like, what went well, what didn't go so well. And the next slides are going to cover that in more detail. Why no React? I hear you cry. Or maybe you're thinking it, at least this has come up a few times for us when we were discussing this internally. I think the bottom line is there are lots of libraries and frameworks that are suitable and just as capable to do the job. I think you could even expand the argument, where do you stop? Like, why not Angular? Why not Ember? Why not, whatever, Inferno? So firstly, we have to draw a line. And secondly, the reason why we didn't choose React is because in terms of those considerations, for example, small, fast, maintainable, we just didn't feel like it fit those specific requirements as well. So here are the pros and cons for each one. Let's start with Preact. Things that we did like about it: API compatible replacement for React. So hopefully you can see that, but the size is a no-brainer. Back to that, so Preact is only 3 kilobytes in size compared to React's 135. And back to that idea of speed and efficiency, this was really ideal for us. State management. So the latest version of Preact supports hooks and context API. This is a different variety of ways to basically manage the state. And this is a pro because these are some of the most recent features from React, and it's good to see that it's being supported. even though the size has been massively reduced. The Preact command line interface gives fantastic progressive web application support out of the box. This basically means you can generate a best practice product in seconds. And it works well with many libraries in React's ecosystem. So some of the things that we didn't like, oh, sugar, sorry, where am I? There we are. So some of the things, let me just, sorry, where was I? So yeah, some of the things that we didn't like about it, it's based on React design decisions. So as new React features become available, it may take some time before support is added to Preact. Limited feature set. So obviously with Preact being massively reduced in size, there will be some limitations and some loss of features. And a small community. One of the things I noticed when working with Preact is there's not much of an online presence within the tech community. So I guess that means that it might be harder to find answers to questions and resolutions to errors. And I also found the documentation to be a bit light. Cool, so moving on to Vue. Some pros, it's a super small framework. It's obviously not as small as Preact, but in comparison, but it's certainly competitive in terms of performance. It's easy to read and intuitive. So Vue's templating language is quite easy to make sense of. I think so anyway, maybe in comparison to something like JSX. However, if JSX is your thing, then Vue does support this. Extensive and detailed documentation. It was one of the things I really love working with Vue. There are so many examples given, they're concise and they're relevant. And I think when I first learned it, I just spent a couple of hours on the documentation, and I was confident that I knew what I was doing and how to use it. Good developer tools. So, for example, the Chrome extensions, it allows you to debug the component and the state in real time. And also things like the Vue command line interface, meaning that your new Vue app can include things like routing, state store, linting, unit tests, and so on. And finally, native TypeScript support. So a lot of people are adopting TypeScript. Perhaps it makes sense that we have a framework that supports this if we decide we want to use it too. So some of the things that we considered cons when using Vue, lack of support for large-scale projects. So what I mean by that is that React obviously was born from Facebook. It's probably one of the biggest scaled projects out there. Whereas Vue is much more of a grassroots movement. Say it was started by developers, not by big companies. It doesn't have the backing of a large enterprise like Facebook. And I think it would be fair to say that Vue maybe hasn't been proven at that scale yet. And it's a little over-flexible. So in Vue, it supports a lot of different ways of doing things, which means you can get messy patterns, inconsistent structures, and perhaps there isn't just one uniform way. And moving on to Svelte, the pros. Firstly, it compiles code to framework-less vanilla JavaScript. So Svelte is a compiler. It's not a library and it's not a framework. So it means that your Svelte syntax is compiled into vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And the browser doesn't need to load like a library or framework to interpret that syntax at runtime. And also, because it's a compiler, there are 0 client-side dependencies, which means that you'll have less code, higher performance, less HTTP requests, etc. And so obviously, following on from that, it was the fastest in our test for delivery and interactivity. No more complex state management. So I think what I mean by that is there's no complex way of defining states or needing anything like actions in comparison to something like Redux. Excellent documentation. Really, really great examples online, and they provide a working coding platform like an interactive Svelte playgrounds. I thought that was really great. I learned a lot just from using that. And this is probably my favorite one. Accessibility warnings out of the box. So obviously, because it's a compiler, it's catching some of the errors on build time. And another personal pro for me was that I found the syntax to be super intuitive. it feels closer to the native web standards. So I'm going to show some code snippets soon, and hopefully that will be evident to everybody. Some cons that we didn't like, smaller community. So it seems to me there is very little activity or no activity on Stack Overflow. The community seems to be largely based on a Discord app. So that seems to be the best way if you want to get support, if you want to contribute, or you need some, if you want to get involved, basically. No, not as advanced developer tooling. And finally, no native TypeScript support. For those in our team who love and want to use TypeScript, Svelte, maybe a little more setup is necessary. Cool. So the next slides will demonstrate some code comparisons, just to give a flavour of what working with each one would be like. So sorry if you can't see that, but it's basically a simple component. All it's doing is demonstrating how to create a button with an attribute of disabled equals false. And there are some interesting differences. So starting with Vue, conventionally the component is broken up into basically a single page component. So you have your HTML, you have your CSS, and JavaScript on one page. Some developers like this, including myself. I think it's very organized. I read it quite easily. For example, if you wanted to fix a specific component, you don't have to switch between files. However, I think looking at the export, if you can see it, the export object, it's a little verbose considering how simple that this is supposed to be. And then in the top right, Preact, we have a functional component as opposed to a standard-based component, but that's because Preact doesn't support class-based components. I have nothing really to add to it. I think it looks really neat and it's really concise. And then the bottom one is Svelte. Again, nothing more to add to it really. I think the expression of the same component, I would say, is even more concise. Cool. So I think it's worth comparing the templating styles of each one too. So this is some code from the apps I created. It's worth noting, obviously, that I've stripped this right back just for the purpose of this demo. But in a nutshell, all I'm doing is I'm importing a JSON file and then I'm just rendering that on the page. So as a standard, if we start with Preact on the left, as a standard, Preact uses JSX. Whether you do or you don't like it, sometimes I find that conditional rendering and loops, it can be a bit difficult to read. Anyone who's used React before might recognize that the syntax is absolutely identical as well. The only difference demonstrated here is the use of CSS modules, which is supported out of the box when creating a Preact app. When you create a Preact app using the Preact command line interface. And then Svelte in the middle, I think it has an intuitive, super simple style of expressing condition loops and rendering values. It uses that block syntax. And hopefully you'll agree, just by comparing the Preact and Vue one, I think it's a bit more obvious what's happening in the Svelte one than maybe in the Preact one. Hopefully you'll agree with me on that. But I would say it's a lot clearer. And then finally, looking at Vue, it provides a familiar templating style similar to Angular. So I don't know if you can see it, but you've got your v-for and you've got your v-bind. I think it would be fair to say that Vue takes a bit more of a structured approach using classes and the data privacy. Cool. With all that being said and done, we decided that we will be using Svelte. Yay. I think if we weren't going to use Svelte, I would probably have chosen Vue second and then Preact. But they all get trophies because they were all, good sports. Cool. So just to add on to that, this was taken from stateofjs.com. This was a developer survey from 2019 on interest and satisfaction. In terms of frameworks, I just thought it was worth showing. I don't think you can see that, and I really don't want to zoom in just in case I don't want to touch it. But in terms of satisfaction, apparently, I don't know if you can see it. In terms of, and the first one here in satisfaction, in terms of satisfaction, Svelte came second just under React, and then in terms of what we've been testing, Vue, and then Preact right underneath. I thought this was really interesting considering how recent Svelte is. And then here, in terms of interest, Svelte is the most popular. It's that tiny green line there. And then we have Vue and then Preact. And interestingly, the prediction award for upcoming technology that might take over or not, and I think that should be stressed, or not, but the prediction award is for Svelte. And I must admit, I agree with it. I think 2020 is the year for Svelte. So, in conclusion, mainly the reasons why we went with Svelte is because it prioritizes the end user. So Svelte's mission is to, it's really resonated with us and putting user front and center. That's definitely what we want to do. Small and fast, zero dependencies, and I've already mentioned this, but just to add on to that, it reduces security risks and improves performance. Cool. Very nice. Thanks. So this is the first time I've presented or spoken at an event like this, by the way, so if you want to find me afterwards, I'll be by the alcohol. But I welcome any comments and any feedback, or you can find me on Twitter. Cool. Thank you.